Hello, I'm Ryan Cook, and this is Civic Tech Chat, a show that looks at the way technology, politics, and policy impacts the world around us, the tools we use, the way services are delivered, and how we talk about and set policy all shape our society. We'll gather around and have a chat about these things together and more. Either that, or maybe I'll rant about a topic for a while. Before we get started, I do want to let you all know that we've started a Discord for the podcast. There will be a link with an invite down in the episode description. Do feel free to go check that out. It's a small community right now, but hoping to grow it. It's a great way to reach out to me and let me know things that you might want us to cover, or to just hang out and talk about civic tech. Anyway, let's go ahead and start the show. Adam, thank you so much for joining us here on Civic Tech Chat. Could you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about what you do?
Thank you, Ryan. Adam Probalski. I'm president of Probalski Research. We are a Latina and woman-owned opinion and market research firm, which means we do polling and focus groups and other kinds of original research for everybody from government agencies to corporate entities to nonprofits, and looking forward to chatting.
Adam, what would you say is your personal why? That thing that drives you to get out of bed each morning and do what you do?
Is it wrong to say to make money? I think that's the reason I think I do, not the altruistic one, but just, that's what motivates you to get it done. I'm naturally curious, and I think that's important in my business. Want to learn. I like to be the person that learns on a regular basis. So maybe that's a more appropriate answer.
Are there any pieces of media, whether a podcast, book, video, or some other such thing like that you'd recommend to folks to check out?
I'm a big fan of geography, and I think it's really affects everything that we do, and it's a kind of a lost science. So there's a book, Ken Jennings has a book on geography that I think is really, really kind of fun, and another one called Why Geography Matters by a guy whose name I can't pronounce. So I think if we all had a better sense of geography, I think we'd all be able to get along a lot better and have a sense of that history. Like Iran. I mean, Iran's been invaded 400 times. So then you get the sense of oh, now I know why they're a little bit defensive. So geography is helpful.
Well, I think we can go ahead and segue into our main topic, where we're going to be talking a bit about things like opinion research and how that feeds into government. As folks might gather from that personal why question I asked, something that I like to do is kind of start with why as we get kind of going into a topic. So, Adam, in your view, why should one go about the practice of doing opinion research?
Sure. So you can fly blind, and you can fly by your gut, and you can probably do fairly well with that. And quite frankly, most people and organizations do. But if you have the benefit of having a budget, not a massive budget, but a little bit of money to be able to test the message and how to communicate and how to kind of get from A to B, you're going to be just so much better off in being on the mark and being responsive to your constituency, whether you're a government agency or a corporation. Knowing what people really think, how they think, what their behaviors are, and if you're trying to move the dial, to know what is going to move them. So it's just logic. If you believe in the art and science of research, then you're going to be much better off in having that on your side.
In an interview you did with the Orange County Register, you mentioned that you see polling as a bridge between policymakers and the public. You then go on to describe three things that are foundational to that metaphorical bridge. Could you talk a bit about that for folks?
Sure. So this gets into the specifics of what we do in general when it comes to opinion research. What we tend to do is first test, do you support or oppose, whatever it is, the building the new sewer plant, or making the mayor, an elected position, directly elected to the public, or raising sewer rates, whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish, or in the case of a business, support or oppose the new housing development. And so we tend to test that and see where people are. Then we tend to test the message. And the message is. And so let's say you're trying to build new houses. You might have opposition to the homes, but you might have support for the $1 million that are going to be put towards transportation improvements, or the $2 million that are going to be put towards schools, or whatever other resources that are out there. So you're going to test those different messages to see, okay, what brings people on board to be supportive of whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. And then, so that's the message. Then there's the mode. How do they communicate? So we'll probably talk about it more later, but in polling, right, we are now in a multi-mode scenario where we talk to people on the phone and on email and on text and in the mail and all these different environments online. So we need to figure out where people are spending their time. Are they all on Nextdoor, or are they all on YouTube, or are they all still having landlines, and making sure we're communicating with them how they like to communicate and getting them messages at the places where they spend time. And then the third part, that's the mode, and then their third part is the message carrier. Who is it that's going to be effective? Is it the mayor that's going to be effective? Is it the CEO that's going to be effective as a message carrier? Or is it the public works guy or gal who have a helmet, a white helmet, and are look like they're doing something with their hands? Or is it the scientist with the pocket protector? Or is it the spokesperson in a suit? Who is the best message carrier to kind of communicate what it is you're trying to communicate? Who's respected? And that could be different, by the way, for different groups. So one of the things that polling tells you is, overall you have support, or overall they like the message of more money for schools. But it turns out that seniors care more about water quality, and younger people care more about traffic. And seniors are much more respect the general manager of the agency versus young people who respect the local influencer, or whatever thing we're trying to accomplish. So really it's part of the value of the research is to really be able to segment your mode and your message and your message carrier to really focus in on who it is you're trying to move, or who it is you're trying to educate and inform.
Adam, I think something I'm hearing there is that you might actually do some research just to figure out who that best carrier is, to kind of and try to match that to his concerns. Am I hearing that correctly there?
Yeah, for sure. So on a water conservation message, who is it that you're going to trust? Is it the director of the state water agency, or is it the climate action scientist, or is it the environmentalist, or is it the mayor? And try to figure out, or the legislature, or the governor, try to figure out who it is that people are going to be responsive to. And oftentimes, someone or some entity rises to the top, and we kind of recommend that be the main focus of who the message carrier should be. But like I said, sometimes different groups are much more responsive to different types of message carriers, and you have the luxury, oftentimes, especially in a digital world, of segmenting who you're talking to in those different environments, or in direct mail even, and using those particular message carriers that are most effective.
Something I'm kind of curious about, I actually realized this is definitely not a question from the sheet, but folks have seen kind of effectively like polling come out about like level of trust in government, which I think would maybe relate to some, like, as you're say, if you're looking at, should I have a person in an authoritative position of government be the messenger for this? Is that something you've seen bear out in your experience in recent times, or not so much?
The truth is, about 6 years ago, we saw a precipitous drop in trust in government and all institutions in this country, or just all institutions in general. There was just a collapse of trust in any kind of formal entity. And we have started to, in the last year and a half or so, kind of come back a little bit from that. But yeah, it's a big problem because it's not just the Congress, right? We used to have the scenario where I'm kind of stacking my hands here, right, where local government is on top and legislature, whatever state it is, in the middle, and the U.S. Congress is the bottom, right? But this place where we held up high our local agencies, our regional agencies, our counties, our cities, and we felt like we were close to them and they had our best interests at heart. And we saw that really just bottom out altogether. And the same thing went for even nonprofits and everyone from the CIA to the local parks district. So I mean, it became a real problem to find the message carrier. I think we're seeing that come back a little bit, and we do see pockets of places like for specific, and I talk a lot about water because we do a lot with water, but water agencies do still have a lot of credibility, and certain local agencies still have credibility, and there are outliers where the city or the county has kind of built a lot of great trust over the last couple of years, and people do have faith in them. But in general, it is a challenge because institutions across the board are way lower than where they were before.
I think you started to allude to this a bit from the original question, but I imagine it can be kind of difficult these days to get a representative sample as you're trying to figure out what a community is thinking on an issue. And you mentioned things like there's different mediums for communication, and technology has changed those a bit. Like, for example, landline use has gone down quite a bit, and I've heard that cited in commentary about polling. Is that particular example something that's particularly challenging, and what other challenges have you run into with those communication mediums?
So I hate to be the one that's contrary, but the narrative that it's harder to poll today than it was at any other time is so off base. And it's really easy for me to explain it. 20 years ago, we had to call you at dinner time. It was the only way to get a representative poll and convince you to step away from your biscuits or whatever it was and talk to us for 20 minutes. Now, I get to call you on your mobile. I get to send you an email. I get to send you a text. I can send you a piece of mail. I can send you, with a QR code. I can talk to you while you're walking the dog because you've got AirPods in. I can talk to you while you're driving to the office because you're on speaker. There is so much more opportunity for our interviewers to talk to you or let you respond online at 2 o'clock in the morning or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So it has only gotten dramatically easier, actually, to do survey research, to get responses, to be representative. There's all kinds of new ways. There's people who sign up for panels to respond to surveys. I can recruit people by social media, really targeted, not just like, hey, do you want to take a survey and hope they live in Dallas. I can actually send, it's called a custom audience. I can target only people in Dallas by uploading a list of consumers to Facebook and have ads going directly to them on Facebook and Instagram, only to the people that live in those communities. So, and obviously you can call and it is infinitely easier to get the job done. It's a narrative that I think somehow, maybe some pollsters started because they wanted to charge more money, but it is actually less expensive today than it was before.
I think something I'm hearing there is that there's more opportunities for contact, and that maybe even the medium itself becomes kind of data that you have. It itself kind of communicates something. Am I kind of hearing that correctly?
So data is a big part of the business beyond the answers to the questions, because we have underlying data. So let's say we're dealing with something that's on a policy level or an election level, for a city or county or even statewide ballot measure. Then you're using typically the voter file, which has, most states has a very rich set of information: your age, your gender, where you were born, your language preference, your party, all those different things. Incidentally, in Hawaii, they don't tell me how old you are. They stopped looking at that in 1992, which is kind of annoying. But in most places, they have a lot of data. How often you vote, when you return your ballot if you're voting by mail. now. So that is a big part of it, because I can use that as a starting point before I even ask questions. We can do the analytics to get some of the initial understanding and answers. And then on the consumer side, if we're not dealing with something that's election related, but still most likely public policy, which is a lot of what we do, but it could be market research too. We are, for better or for worse, a data-driven society where, I don't know how much money you have in your bank account, Ryan, but I know you bank with Wells Fargo. And I know there's between $50,000 and $250,000 in there. And I know that you have 6 credit cards. And I'm kind of pulling these numbers out of thin air, but the truth is, if I looked you up in data, I would have that information. Experian and all these other companies collect that, and we have access to it. So yeah, we have our starting point today is much better than it was years ago, because we have, I know what magazine subscriptions you have, so I can kind of presuppose that you have a cat and you own a gun and you go to Disney on a regular basis because of your consumer habits that are fully available. And we can all lament like how outrageous that is, but the data's out there, so we're going to use it, and it's just the reality of the consumer society we live in today.
And the listeners can have fun trying to figure out which of the random examples actually apply to me in this case.
Exactly.
So you bring up data, and I think something that I would imagine happens is you're getting data from a bunch of different sources of varying types. It can kind of go into a research engagement. Can you talk a bit about the process of distilling all of that information down into something that leads to, maybe something actionable or something you can draw a conclusion from?
Sure. So we start with the first starting point is universe. Who are we talking to? Are we talking to voters if it's something election related, or are we talking to consumers if it's something not specifically election related that makes it not allowed? You can't use the voter file unless it's election related. And then from there, we sit down with the client, and if it's a company that's trying to sell widgets, or it's a city that's trying to check on their customer service and what people think about, from a best management practices, best practices, how are we going to improve our services and be more responsive to the public? Or, we've got a finite discretionary budget. We spend $50 million a year as a city, and literally like $5 million of that isn't programmed. Where should we put that to be responsive to the public? So we then sit down with the client, and these days it's a lot of time on Zoom, but we love being in person, and we say, okay, what do we want to accomplish? What do we want to learn? And oftentimes we're using questions that are kind of similar to other public agencies because they want to have comparison data. But most of the time it's kind of unique things that we're asking about that community. And then we have the questionnaire that's approved by the client. We do the field work, meaning we call people, we email them, we text them, we send them mail, whatever it takes in that particular community to make sure we can get a representative sample. And that is so critical here, making sure we have the right number of people in each age group, in each gender, ethnicity, all those things to make sure we're really matching that community when we're done. And then in the end, that report is actionable. Our goal is, or our biggest fear is kind of delivering some sort of mind-numbing set of numbers that no one's going to do anything with. Our goal is to give these like very quick, actionable moments of, here's what they think, and here's what you can do to make a change. Here's what they think, and here's why they think you're doing a great job at it. And so it's our job from a data visualization standpoint to make sure that everything we provide is actionable on the part of the agency or the client we're working with.
As you're working with those agencies and clients, have you ever found yourself in a position where you've had to kind of advocate, like, hey, like, no, this data is useful to what you're trying to do? And if so, like, how have you gone about trying to tell that story? As I imagine it can be difficult at times.
Yeah, and it happens. Obviously, it's much more fun when you're working with a client who trusts the science of research and the math and appreciate it and really kind of want to use the data to the benefit of the community or their constituency. And yes, there are definitely moments where someone says, "I don't believe you," or "I didn't get a call, so it can't be real," or it just doesn't fit their narrative, their idea of how things are supposed to go, or what people are supposed to think in their minds. So they're going to discount it, and there's not a lot that can be done other than point to the body of work out there of opinion research that is 99.9% accurate, and you can point out some of the really negative and things that show that they're not accurate. But in the vast majority of professionals who do what I do, the results we deliver are accurate at that moment. Now, obviously, factors change. So if you say, "Oh, well, the election changed, and 6 weeks later something different happened," well, we can explain that away. But if someone generally does not want to believe in the data, there's not a lot we can do. If you have an agenda that is counter to what the results are, I'm probably not going to convince you, and that's probably pretty sad, because you can have a differing viewpoint. I love the phrase "I disagree." I really despise the phrase expletive, expletive, expletive. I hate you. It's just not productive. And I'm a policy guy who loves data, and we generally we don't get it wrong. I mean, we have an accuracy rate of 100% when it comes to predicting outcomes. So I can only point to the data, and then that's about as far as I can go.
As you think back on your work, putting together this sort of data, are there any anecdotes top of mind for we did this research and it ultimately led to this public policy proposal or change that you'd be willing to share?
Sure. I mean, all the time. I mean, we do a poll in a little town in New Jersey that asked the public whether they wanted to pay for a community center. I mean, I know it sounds like kind of silly, but boom, it tells you right there they're not willing to spend the money, so the town isn't going to spend the money. Or right now we're doing a lot of work on conservation in the Western U.S., trying to understand. We've been in the Western U.S. We've been under kind of drought conditions on and off for decades, and so there's this constant drone of use less. You do more with less. Conserve or be efficient. And so we're at this point where we've got to make incremental improvements. And how do we do that? So we've got to ask the questions: do you think you can do more? What is it? Would you rather have a rebate on water efficient appliances, or would you rather have someone come to your home and give you tips on how to fix things? I'll tell you right now, they do not want anybody coming to their home. They do not want we're from the government. We're here to help you save water. They want, they'll install whatever appliance you tell them to install, just don't show up. And so our job is to figure that out. And yeah, there's constant examples of, figuring out what that nuance to the message is to get people to be a little bit more conscious of their conservation and water efficiency. And the same thing goes for let's say the kind of typical customer service or issue or budget prioritization, where a small town or even a big city where you have the public saying that they're really upset about sidewalks. An older community where you've got trees that are encroaching on sidewalks and pushing them up. You've got to have that balance between preserving trees and keeping sidewalks safe. And so sometimes the polling says sidewalks are the priority. It's okay to get rid of the trees. And I know that's sounds like super detailed and in the weeds, but that's what public policymakers have to deal with on a regular basis, and that's what staff has to deal with on a regular basis. How do we make these hard decisions? And research will tell you oftentimes, is it okay to have crappy sidewalks, or is it okay to get rid of the trees, and which one you're going to do first?
Something I'm kind of curious about, since you mentioned the conservation and kind of the Western region specifically, is I've heard that conservation is probably something, particularly in that region, that's a concern that kind of crosses political ideologies, perhaps because it's something that's kind of more real and in your face in that region. Is that something you've kind of seen bear out? Is there general consensus? Maybe not hey, someone should show up to your house, as you mentioned, but that some community action is probably needed to address those concerns?
I think one of the challenges is everything's become partisan, and everything's become so divided. And so, yes, in a place like California or in a place like Nevada, where from a water resource standpoint, we all know that we're short on water and we've got to make a change. Yes, I think there's kind of general consensus. But as soon as you start talking about the solutions or long-term solutions, you have big divergence in support. So, for instance, you've got this kind of conservative, kind of Republican understanding of we need more surface storage. We need to store more water. And then you've got, maybe a more progressive or democratic perspective of we need to, maybe limit growth or change the way we deliver water. And there's this you're going to start very quickly becoming partisan once you get beyond. Yeah, we need to have a better water resource goal.
So I think what I'm hearing there is effectively like same goal but different paths to get there.
Yeah, and I think that's just the case for almost every public policy issue these days. We're starting to find that as, and maybe to some degree, it's partisan, or it's just kind of, it's just diverging paths, and part of it also is the democratization of information. And the ease of which we can spread disinformation. Your city has a $50 million budget. 22 million goes toward cops. 18 million goes towards the firefighters, or whatever. There's a $12 million water department. I mean, the money is like specifically programmed. It's not like there's money flying out the door to people going on vacation to Hawaii. So really, but the narrative sometime on Nextdoor could be very easily, OMG, they just bought, a new, all new police cars and they didn't need them, or I can't believe they just spent $50,000 on a new website. Those are always the things that people get so upset about. The ones that they all kind of understand, because like they can build a website or WordPress site for $12. So it's like, how could you possibly spend $50,000 on that? Or the rebranding, we don't need rebranding. We don't need to attract, tourism, and you can make that direct correlation between spending $100,000 on rebranding and the millions of dollars in revenues you get from tourism or from business coming to town. But it's really easy to throw rocks at something like that, and so that narrative quickly can get out of hand. And which, by the way, is one of the reasons why the research is so helpful, because you have this moment where you have these 16 people showing up and being angry, or 50 people on Nextdoor saying mean things, and then you can show from a public opinion standpoint, broadly people don't care, or broadly people are supportive, because they're just not as engaged as those 50 people. They just generally say, yeah, city's doing a good job, or yeah, it's smart to spend the money in that way. And you can kind of counter that negative messaging that's out there.
As we continue to talk about and mention polling, I think a lot of folks, when I say that word, maybe start to picture those kind of like horse race polls that, there's a lot of stuff on the news about as you get closer to an election. That seems to be like the hot item in those stories. How does the work that goes into those differ from the sort of research that we've been talking about so far?
I mean, so first, foundationally, it's a voter file, which is what we tend to use. And that gives us that perspective of all the background information, not the consumer stuff, but the party and the age and the gender and all that kind of similarly is on consumer, but more data on the about politics on your election file. So foundationally, that's the big difference. And then obviously our goal is to understand who's going to win. It's not just what do you think and how do you feel and what messages sell. It's oftentimes, in a political sense, it is the horse race. Does measure, A, pass or fail. and then what are the motivational messages that'll move you towards it. So it's not that different than, a ballot measure is not that different than a candidate, they're basically the same thing. We're just trying to figure out where we are today, what messages move people, pro and con, and then what's going to happen in the end and predict the outcome, and drive the outreach message, the campaign itself. Whereas policy-wise, we're not necessarily trying to always move the dial, although sometimes we are, and we're always super conscious, depending on the laws of the state. Almost in every case, government can't advocate for the passage or failure of a ballot measure or a candidate, of course. But they can certainly be in the business most of the time of educating the public on the pros and cons of, let's say, a ballot measure, passing or failing. You can say, look, if this ballot measure passes, we get to have pretty parks and green grass and a playground for everyone. If it fails, we're going to put chain link fences around the parks. They're going to go brown, and nobody gets to play in a park. Now, that's kind of a dramatic messaging there, but that's the kind of thing that could potentially be done by a local jurisdiction or even a state agency. Versus actually advocating, where in election polling it's a campaign whose specific agenda is to pass or fail a measure or a candidate, and they're much more aggressive in their words and much more vote yes, vote no, whereas government can't do that.
Yeah, and as we're talking about those campaigns that kind of they have an agenda, they're kind of being aggressive about a thing they want you to think. A technique that often is used by those organizations is a thing called push polling, where effectively maybe is more of a tool of persuasion than about trying to figure out where people are. Is that a practice that you think is effective, or what's your hot take on? Yeah,
let me. That's a very sensitive subject for pollsters. No pollster you've ever heard of, seen, whatever engage with has ever done a push poll. A push poll, and it's a crappy set of words because it doesn't. It's very incongruent to the research. What you'd consider a push poll is someone, a campaign, calling 10,000 or 100,000 people, or some massive number of people, saying, "Hey, did you know that Smith got a DUI and ran over 3 people and served 3 years of probation? No? Okay, thanks, goodbye." That's a push poll, and that's just a crock of shit, right? It's not in any way a set of research. Research will absolutely, what we do, we absolutely ask a question that is aimed to push people in one direction and see if they are responsive to that message and see if they will gravitate towards that. But we are asking 300 or 400 or 800 people or 1,200 people, whatever it is, a question in order to understand the research. And we're never going to say something that's totally outright a lie. Right? We're never going to call someone a child molester when they're not. We may ask a question about the DUI and say, if you knew Smith had a DUI and served 3 years of probation, would that make you more likely or less likely to vote for them in the context of 20 or 30 or 50 other questions? But it's really in the interest of research, not in the interest of educating the public, or not even educating, in the interest of messing with people's minds and putting a message out there. That is never the aim of research.
And I think you might have been getting into the space with kind of beginning to talk about this being a bit of like a sensitive term and topic for folks in the profession. Yeah. Is that something y'all struggle with, is like that kind of conflation between the two things? Like that first thing you described where it's like clearly, I'm trying to cause you to think this thing, it's not research, versus, your other methods that introduce that research rigor is more of a curiosity-based thing than a persuasion thing.
Sure. So if you look at next door, when any pollster, any researcher is doing research in any particular community, the people that don't like the questions or are upset at City Hall or the County Hall administration are going to typically in those next door conversations say, oh, this was a push poll because they were only asking questions about blah, blah, blah. And so, sure, it's definitely something that comes up. And then it's our job as researchers when we make a presentation to the policymakers, to the council or the staff or whatever it is to say, to counter that, make clear, this was research. We did want to test messages, and we did. But in no way were we trying to influence the outcome broadly. We might have been trying to influence people who were responding to the survey to see how they would respond to messages. So, for instance, for a tax measure, we might say if you knew that everybody's would get puppies and kittens and you have rainbow Skittles for everybody, if you passed, and if it failed, we would have an earthquake and the demons would rise from the earth. Would you be more or less likely? We might ask questions that are really charged, but again, the goal is to understand what people's response would be and how they would be moved by those messages. Sometimes things that are things that City Hall might talk about, positive stuff, and also sometimes what the naysayers, what we know the taxpayer group might say. We want to make sure we ask those questions to understand the real impact on the outcome, because we ask the ballot question again at the end, and we to see how those push and pull, the neighbor to neighbor conversations would affect the outcome of the election once we test those things.
I think something I'm hearing there is that at times folks, even public officials, might receive the results of your research through their own lens and kind of with their own internal biases there already. Is that a struggle you've had with folks you've worked with? If so, how do you go about addressing that in the conversation?
For sure, it's a big part of what we deal with, and what we do is try to set up very early on in the process that this is research. It's statistically valid, it's representative, and this is what your public thinks. And it may be counter to what you think, it may be counter to what you've heard out there. It's pretty hard, I think, for policymakers because they're in the supermarket, they're in the public, they go to events all the time, ribbon cuttings or whatever it is, and they hear from their constituents, and oftentimes it's a little bit of an echo chamber, and they really just hear from the people that want to tell them what they want to hear or people complaining, and so it's a bit of a challenge for us just to make it clear that this is math. It's a little bit of art, but mostly the science of research, and these are the real numbers that represent your constituency. And even if you don't think it quite aligns with what you're familiar with or what you've heard, the reality is it is real. And usually there's some validating data throughout the poll, throughout the survey, or focus groups or whatever we're doing, that they can say, oh yeah, I believe that. So it's harder for them to say, oh, I don't believe the other one. So hopefully they find something that they can latch onto, even if they don't necessarily want to believe the data.
So Adam, it's not, every day on the podcast that I get to have someone on with, expertise in polling. And so there's a kind of a question that I almost feel forced to try to ask out of curiosity. And that's that folks might be aware that there's been this kind of commentary that happens with each election cycle in recent times that, oh, the polls have gotten it wrong in some way in trying to predict the result.
Right.
What's your perspective, or dare I say, hot take on that narrative?
So, I at the risk of sounding, self-serving, we have 100% accuracy rate at predicting outcomes. So, I'm an advocate for our industry. It's not, you don't have to hire me. You can hire any researcher that's good at what they do. And so I don't really know necessarily what. I don't know what the problem is that those folks are having getting the numbers right, some of those people. But I'll tell you the challenges that I think some people face when it comes to polling. Nationally, it's kind of hard because you do have 50 unique states, so presidential is a little bit more of a challenge. I don't do presidential polling, so maybe that makes it easier for me. But if you're not engaging, if your pollster is stuck in 1996, then there's a good chance that they're not going to get the numbers right. So if you're not embracing the multi-mode environment, if you're not meeting voters or people who are responding to your surveys where they are, which is largely online today, then you're going to have a challenge on your hands in getting good data. The other thing that I think is more important than anything else is the poll of polls, which is this thing that we desperately crave, as Americans or people in general. I want to see the aggregate of all the data and tell me the answer. And there's nothing accurate about that, because the methodology of poll A is different than B, is different than C, and all of a sudden you put those numbers together and you just have a massive pile of garbage. So when you see a poll of polls, some aggregated data set, it is totally useless. But we like it because it's fun to look at, and it makes us feel like we're doing something sophisticated. We're taking some sort of numbers and putting them together and being sophisticated in our approach. So I think that's the biggest problem I've seen. But I'll give you an example of a thing that we don't do that you think everybody else does. If I was calling you and asking you a question about the upcoming midterm election in November, I would never ask you if you were planning on voting. Because the truth is, I already know whether you're going to vote. I have a very clear picture of your voting history, and I'm not going to ask you that question because you lie. Why do you lie? Because the American experience is that we are a democracy, and that we're not really, but we a democracy, and that we should all vote. Right? My social contract is that I'm going to vote because it's the right thing to do. So the actual turnout's going to be 42%, and in the primary, and I'm going to get 77% of people say they're voting yes. In what world is that useful for me? So you really need to look at the previous data and the analytics to inform who it is you're even going to ask the questions to, and that's like a big factor. So I think there's a ton of great researchers out there, a ton of great pollsters. And then there's some people that are just putting out crap numbers, and you've got to be a little discerning. And if someone is you can be a partisan if you want, but you've also got to be accurate in your data. And if you're not realistic in what you're presenting, you're going to have a problem in it. And sometimes people just do that sort of thing for press. But it's their credibility just gets killed the minute they're really, really wrong.
Adam, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to join us here on Civic Tech Chat. I have no doubt that folks have gotten to learn a bit more about opinion research and how it might, serve a purpose in communities around them.
Thank you very much for having me.
You can follow us on Twitter using the handle @CivicTechChat, visit us on the web at civictech.chat, or subscribe to us for content updates wherever it is you download your podcasts.